Okay, let's get going. If anyone logs on a couple of minutes late, all they will miss is my introduction, which isn't that important. So there we go. Right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another of our enterprise webinar series. And this morning, we're talking about demonstrating your ESG credentials the right way. So if you're expecting anything else to be talked about, you're in the wrong place. My name's Esther Carder. I'm very pleased to be hosting this morning, and I should be doing some light chairing. There are quite a few familiar faces on the delegate list, as there usually are. We usually have our sort of cohort of people who religiously attend these things. But for those of you who are a bit less familiar with who we are, Moore Kingston Smith is a top 15 audit, tax and advisory firm. We work with lots of entrepreneurial businesses across lots of different sectors, as well as not-for-profit and private clients. We're also part of More Global, which is an international network with presence in over 100 countries, so very well placed to advise our clients on international expansion. So environmental, social and governance, or ESG, is likely to feature fairly high on your business's agenda. However, you might also be worried about the perceptions of greenwashing when demonstrating your ESG credentials, which can put the efficacy of ESG practices and investments at risk. So today, our panel are going to be discussing the various ways to demonstrate your ESG credentials and to avoid greenwashing. And they'll also talk about some of the common frameworks, reporting standards and rating agencies that can support your ESG messaging. Now, we sent out a poll sort of along with the invites, and I think we did a little chaser as well. So thank you for those who completed that poll. And the answer to the first question, which was sort of, where are you on your ESG journey, was really that sort of a quarter of you hadn't really made a start, and half of you had sort of made a start, but you didn't quite know where to get next. And I think that's indicative of how many people we've got signed up today who'd like to know a little bit more. So delighted to introduce our panel today. We have Jeremy Reed, who is a partner in our corporate services team and also leads our ESG group. He represents Moore Kingston Smith, working with other ESG leaders across the More Global network, and has significant experience of working on audit and other non-audit assurance projects across many different sectors. Charlie Killingbeck, who is also a manager at Moore Kingston Smith in our ESG team. And before joining Moore Kingston Smith, Charlie spent 2 years working for ESG and impact advisors. And he was providing advice to a whole range of clients, including early stage and high growth companies and public bodies. And this experience really does give him a unique perspective to help clients navigate the complex ESG frameworks and reporting requirements that exist. And last but not least, we have Graham Banks, who is Financial Director at Good Agency and has direct experience of gaining B Corp status for his organisation. And he'll be sharing his experiences of the process and the benefits. So a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Please do ask questions. The more interactive this is, the more fun it'll be, the more interesting it'll be, and the more you'll get out of it. So please do put questions into the Q&A function. It's much easier for me to keep track of them when they are there. And then I will try and weave those questions into the questions that I'm asking the panelists. It is being recorded today, so please do share with any peers or anyone else who couldn't make it. And then at the end, we will be sharing some feedback forms. Please do fill them in. They're super useful in helping us inform what future webinars we do. So starting with Jeremy and Charlie then. So why don't we, maybe sort of for Jeremy, I think this question, I'll direct at. Why don't we start with a quick sort of ESG overview? What do we really mean when we say ESG? Because in my experience, people talk a lot more about the E and the S than they do the G.
Esther, thanks. You're absolutely right. The E, the S and the G. I think the good news is we've got to a point where everybody at least understands what they are. So we no longer tend to go through exactly what that means. But depending on what sector you're in, actually there's quite a big difference of the importance of the E, the S and the G. So for example, if you take a firm like ours, when you're looking at it from an ESG perspective, it's kind of it's more important on the S and the G than it perhaps is on the E. If you're a large scale manufacturer, you're going to be probably more on the E and potentially the S and the G, depending on what the nature of the product is. So where I think there's been a huge movement is actually people starting to understand where they sit. And there's some very good benchmarking out there for depending on which sector you're in, what are the kind of main ESG risks. So I think that's definitely an evolution. I think that's gone pretty well. The other question I think we get quite a lot is, why does ESG matter? And actually, at the largest end of companies, for a long time, there's been a requirement to basically come out with ESG data. And what you'll find is there's some fantastic reports out there from some of the very largest businesses. And if I take Diageo, for example, they've got a fantastic ESG report, which is a great place to start. For any of you who haven't really got too far, read the Diageo report, because it's a very, very good one. But what's happening is, therefore, those businesses being asked about their ESG, and then that's dropping down the supply chain. So pretty much, if you're in somebody's supply chain, ESG is coming your way, the level of which will perhaps be much less for an SME right now, but actually is increasing, particularly with some of the disclosures and requests around emissions. So for everybody, this is going to be business as usual. And I think there's a fundamentally bigger reason for this as well, which is actually about people who want to work with your organization. So people who want to potentially work for you, your customers, suppliers. This is now something that people will make decisions of whether they work with you or join you based on where you sit on ESG. So people have, one of the great benefits of ESG is it's creating a more transparent landscape. And then that's why we come back to some of the conversations around greenwashing, because obviously greenwashing muddies those particular waters. But actually, if you take a view which is around actually the businesses who are able to demonstrate the best ESG credentials for the right reasons are probably likely to be more successful than those businesses who perhaps shy away from it.
Mm-hmm. And we often see the terms ESG as well as impact being bandied about and often used sort of interchangeably. Is there a real difference between the two?
Yeah, so it's something we commonly get asked is the difference between the two. And I think taking them one by one, ESG is primarily a risk management framework. So organizations adopting that kind of environmental, social, those policies around those three pillars are aimed at minimizing an organization's exposure to specific risks within those pillars. And it's really important to note that, like Jeremy said, that those risks within those ES and G pillars will differentiate between sector, jurisdiction, company level. Even companies within the same sector will have different priorities, different agendas from an ESG perspective. And much like an operational strategy, they will have different directions they are taking to solve the problems that they face. And impact, on the other hand, infers some kind of additionality. So that's where organizations within the kind of ESG pillars will have there will be a net benefit there to a stakeholder group. And this distinction becomes really important when we start talking about materiality from an ESG perspective. So on one hand, you have financial materiality. So that's concerned with how environmental, social, and governance factors are impacting the operations of an organization. And that is very much an ESG concept. That's very much what ESG was founded on. Impact materiality is the other direction, so to speak. So that is the impact that an organization is having on its stakeholder groups. And so that distinction becomes really important when you start talking about kind of ESG versus impact. And we'll come on to kind of some of the specific frameworks later, I think, but we are seeing a convergence between kind of ESG and impact through this concept of dual or double materiality. And that's effectively saying that when you are assessing yourself from an ESG or an impact perspective, you need to be considering both directions. You need to be considering the impact you are having on your stakeholders, but also the impact that your stakeholder groups, the E, S, and G, are having on your operations.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that answers the question in summary.
It does, thank you, Charlie. Jeremy, one of the poll questions we included was, why is ESG important? Did the results surprise you? Was it as you expected?
No, the results are actually really well. Thanks everyone for answering incredibly honestly as well. So effectively, what came out of why is it important was three areas came out significantly higher than any others. One of which was actually we're being asked for our ESG creds, and actually that is probably the area from which we're seeing the most people asking us questions. It's like, particularly if you're in professional services, pretty much everything you're going for now, you're going to be asked, what are your ESG creds? So that's one good reason to have it. Second one is actually a genuine, there's a commercial benefit from being strong in ESG. So, if you think about ESG and the classic, people, profits, purpose, actually there's no reason at all. Strong ESG generally gets you all three rather than the other way around. And then finally, just doing the right thing. So increasingly people want to do the right thing. Generation Z in particular, what matters to people joining our organizations is actually that the businesses do the right thing. So wasn't at all surprised, but I particularly like the answer in respect of, because actually we're being asked a lot from creds. And then I think if you're kind of looking at kind of more on a value drivers basis, ESG basically has a whole number of different areas where it'll help you. So if we start from employees, businesses which are stronger on ESG will generally have higher retention than those who don't. And particularly now that people can find out where you sit in respect of ESG. If you take, we issue our own sustainability report. What it means is people can read where we sit in respect of things like social mobility. I think that's important to share with people, and people can then benchmark that against other people. So to me, that's a really important area. Fundamentally, ESG is about risk management. So it's also then, again, businesses who are strong on ESG will generally have a good understanding of the risks that are facing the business. And if you go back to Charlie's point about you looking at that from these two different directions. So the classic thing, that we talk a lot about climate now as well. So ESG, part of the E is very much focused on climate, because there's certain regulations for large companies where you now have to report. But where you get to is you start thinking, you would make decisions which, if you put your business in a floodplain, for example, that's probably not the smartest place from which to build a manufacturing base. But actually, historically, people wouldn't necessarily have had that in the thought process, or because you're seeing more unusual weather events, you start building things slightly differently. Revenue creation. Businesses with strong ESG often will be will appeal to consumers or to their customers in a way that a business with much weaker ESG perhaps might not. Cost of capital can be lower if you're strong on ESG. So a number of funders will have different arrangements for businesses that they consider to be particularly strong on ESG. So that's no downside in being strong there. Customer demands. Do people want to continue working with businesses who are less good at ESG when they can basically work with an alternative who are stronger? Reputation is the thing that comes across in all of these areas. So therefore, reputation management becomes very important. But again, what's the downside in having a great reputation in the market? And then the final thing I would just say is just resource efficiency. Actually, what we see already is businesses who focus, particularly say on the environmental side, maybe are focusing extra hard on resource efficiency. And clearly, again, there's a lovely case study that we talk about every so often of a Fender, who are the guitar people. And what they were actually doing is creating a whole load of extra. When you make a guitar, you end up with little bits of wood left. What they then did is actually opened up a whole new business line, which is to the little the picks, and instead of losing waste, turned it into a product, consumers love it, and actually it's generating, it's making sure they're minimizing waste and maximizing revenue. So it's a win-win.
Sounds good. No reason not to do it, hey. So a good opportunity to ask this question that somebody has asked. They has asked, is it useful to have data which demonstrates the relationship between the investor return and profit as a result of ESG effectiveness? I'm assuming the answer broadly to that is yes. It might be easier said than done, I suppose.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's if you are able to show that and you have a transparent way of calculating it, there's definitely no harm in showing that. I think what you've got to be careful of is obviously the counter narrative or the counterfactual. So that is very hard to measure, and that's often something that comes out a lot in ESG in particular, is how you measure some of these kind of counter narrative, counterfactual aspects of ESG and the decision making. I.e., if you take one course of action that has potentially mitigated or avoided, take carbon emissions, if you take a strategic direction that reduces your emissions, is it fair to say you're benchmarking yourself against your historic performance, and is that counterfactual correct? It's very difficult because developments in if you stayed the course, the technological developments may have changed and reduced that, and so you just got to be careful about the counter narrative, I would say, when you're looking at things like that.
Thanks, Charlie. So the other topic that sort of commonly gets discussed is greenwashing. So Charlie, maybe give us a little bit more detail on what we mean by greenwashing.
Yeah, so greenwashing has become a bit of a catch-all kind of term for any kind of false claims made in the kind of ESG space, ESG or impact space. Greenwashing really at its core is focused around the environmental issues, and then you have lots of other, so you have social washing, which is around the social issues, and then a whole range of others. So you get pink washing, covers issues around LGBTQ+. Blue washing covers organizations who have signed up to kind of UN sustainability principles and delivered no action on, they've signed up but delivered nothing. And so they're kind of, it's that false signaling to the market. But fundamentally, it's all, and under that greenwashing banner, it's all just around kind of falsifying claims and not being true to your organization, positioning yourself differently than the facts. And I think that can take in, there is a huge range. It's not as simple as just falsifying. There are a huge range of kind of, there's a sliding scale of greenwashing, and it can take a number of forms. For example, making a claim about a product, this comes back to this counterfactual point, making a claim about a product being environmental, for example, and not considering other impacts. For example, that product may have a huge social impact that's not being publicized. And so that is in itself greenwashing, because you're not holistically looking at the ESG metrics itself. You're just picking the best one that suits the product. So that's greenwashing. Making kind of vague or irrelevant claims is also greenwashing. And probably most importantly for this discussion, making claims which aren't evidenced. And this is probably the most common one we see, and people don't realize that they're doing it, is when claims are being made about products, services, whatever it may be, their organization, and they just don't have the evidence to back it up. And this is why this whole reporting piece in the market is becoming so important. And linked to what Jeremy was saying about suppliers and supply chain, if you can't evidence what you're messaging, you're going to come unstuck in those pitches, in those opportunities that come up, and that is fundamentally greenwashing in itself.
So what can we do about greenwashing to make sure that we're not doing it then?
Well, I think from my perspective, I mean, the best solution is just the reporting, having a really transparent reporting process, and having a real clear communication policy in place. So you're communicating those messages really clearly, and they are supported by the kind of data that's coming out. And I think that having those regular touch points with your stakeholders is really important. And we are seeing this more and more, that ESG reporting is aligning with financial reporting. So you're seeing the cycles are similar. So your ESG period will cover the same period as your financial reporting. And in some cases, some of the larger clients are even starting to do what's called integrated reporting. So that is a single kind of financial and sustainability report that not only it's not so much a gluing together, but also goes into kind of environmental or social scenarios and sensitivities, which is one of the, we can come on to it later, but it's one of the kind of TCFD requirements, is that that's the Task Force for Climate Related Disclosure. One of the criteria under that framework is that you are doing sensitivity analysis around this kind of these ESG factors. So yes, it's all about that reporting piece, and there are a huge number of frameworks you can pick from, and it's a real minefield, that space. Some of the bigger ones, so there's the Global Reporting Initiative, which is probably the most widely used and is the most broad. It covers the broadest set of stakeholders you can, and it has a focus on that double materiality point that we were talking about before. So it's looking from both directions. SASB, so the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, is another major reporting framework. So that's very investor focused. Primarily, well, it is based on financial materiality. So it's just looking at kind of impacts affecting the organization and the financial impacts of that in particular. That's very big in the US, where it's kind of that more kind of investor focused market. The TCFD, which I mentioned earlier, is the other one. That's the kind of big global climate related framework. And there are so many others. I mean, if there are any investment firms on, for example, there's the Principles of Responsible Investment. There's the UN Compact, which is another one. There are so many, but fundamentally what's happening in the marketplace is we're seeing this kind of coalescence, this alignment of all these frameworks. So the ISSB, so the International Sustainability Standards Board, sorry, there's so many acronyms in this space, it's a minefield, which are effectively the IFRS, the kind of international financial standards. They are a similar board for sustainability reporting. So they are trying to bring together the GRI, and they're working with GRI and SASB to create a global standard. And last month we had the first release of the European standards. And so we are seeing this standardization in the marketplace, which is quite exciting because it gives people a clear path, it gives people a clear direction. But I think when you're looking at those frameworks, it's really important to understand the nuances of each one, what the requirements are, and pick the one that best suits the organization's needs. I think that, for example, if you are reporting ESG primarily for financial purposes, SASB is probably for kind of bank reporting, investor reporting, perhaps your private equity backed. SASB may be the right one to pick for you because that may be where their interests lie. If you're doing it, I know we had lots of the responses were kind of people wanting to do the right thing, and that's comes from a very similar place to where our own sustainability report came from. The Wilkinson Smith sustainability report is kind of doing the right thing in the marketplace, communicating that. And so we picked GRI because it is that broad stakeholder base. It tries to reach all your stakeholder groups rather than just your investors. And then the other side, other than frameworks, there are also kind of rating agencies. So there are two kind of major rating agencies that we see a lot. The first is kind of EcoVadis, which tends to be for larger organizations, and if you're in a big supply chain, they tend to be quite good because they link quite nicely to the different stages of the value chain and the supply chain with that.
When you say larger, how large is larger?
It's a very good question. Large companies, I know, for example, we ourselves have been asked for if we are kind of part of the EcoVadis program. So I'd say kind of, I mean, you're looking at kind of turnovers of 50 million up, I would have thought.
Right, okay, yeah.
50, 100 plus.
Sort of 500 people plus 50 million.
Yeah,
plus.
exactly. That type of size, I would have said.
Yeah, okay.
And then the other side is, and probably the most common we see a lot, is B Corp. It's probably a good place to bring in Graham, our B Corp expert at this stage. But
B Corps, yes, Graham is our resident master of B Corps, and Good Agency scored the highest B Corp score for an agency, didn't they, Graham? So maybe tell us a bit about what it was like to go through that B Corp process and some of sort of the lessons that you learned along the way.
Thanks, Esther. I'm not sure I'd call myself a master, but I'm more than happy to share my
You're more than a master
my
than I am,
learnings.
that's for sure.
Look, I mean, yes, I think you're right. A journey is a good way to describe B Corp. B Corp's a journey of continuous business improvement. It's quite different from an ISO, where you are either accredited or not. With B Corp, you receive a score and are then challenged to improve on that each year. You can therefore make as much or as little of B Corp as you wish. And this is one of the challenges when you start out. So my top 5 very practical tips for anyone starting the process would be, so firstly, really get senior management buy-in. Before starting, it's important to understand the key issues and speak to people who've been through it. For example, do the owners really understand that the articles are going to be changed? Obtaining informed buy-in from your senior management team is important, because whilst they might have limited sort of day-to-day involvement in the work itself, it will definitely help when you have new documentation or processes to introduce. Secondly, I would really include a completer finisher in your B Corp team. So when you're appointing a team, it needs a really good project manager who's a completer finisher. There's such a lot to do, and it could easily get sidelined with day-to-day work. The challenge is that B Corp can be as big as you want it to be. Therefore, you have to be able to focus and decide what matters to the business and what is realistically achievable. Then drive to get those areas completed. If you don't, I think you run a real risk of delay and failing the audit. Thirdly, build yourself a really detailed project plan based on the draft impact assessment. So worth chatting about that a bit. Helpfully, B Corp provides an online impact assessment that you can complete before you are actually audited. So on this assessment, there are 5 impact areas: governance, workers, community, environment, and customers. Once you've completed a draft of the impact assessment, use it to create your detailed project plan that focuses on key areas that align with your business's strategic objectives. The draft assessment helpfully provides an indication of the score you'll receive for each area. Each answer in the assessment scores differently. This provides a really useful reference for the preparation of the project plan and helps highlight any areas where additional work may or may not be required. I found careful planning at this stage really helped the project tasks to move smoothly. Wow. Fourthly, evidence and document everything before your audit. So again, you're touching on some of the comments made earlier. This is an independent verification of your statements. So at the audit stage, you'll be asked to provide supporting evidence for the statements you've made. Having that information ready helps it to go smoothly and also provides the auditor with a lot of confidence that you've taken the application seriously. You'll probably be surprised by the number of things you already do as a business because it's just the right thing to do. However, they may well not be fully documented and will need documenting to provide suitable evidence for the audit. The last thing I'd say is make sure you set some really realistic time expectations at the beginning. So we started the B Corp process in September 2021 and received our accreditation in March 2023. That's 19 months. It can be 24 months or more. So you need to be prepared for a long wait of over 6 months between having got yourself ready for the assessment and submitting it, and then the actual audit starting. And the reason for this is its popularity, in that there's a shortage of assessors, which is why there's a delay. So ensure your senior management team know this, is kept up to date with progress, because they will get asked questions by employees as to why it is taking so long, and this will enable them to just answer those easily.
Thank you very much, Graham. I think that's good top 5 tips there. So, I mean, what were the sort of the contributing factors that led you to receiving such a good B Corp score? And I imagine being an EOT sort of helped with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It did help. Yes, Kingston Smith did an excellent job on advising me and my other shareholder on the setup of our employee ownership trust. So we put the employee ownership trust in place in February 2022. And whilst the motivation was not directly related to B Corp, it definitely helped with the score we achieved. So the key to a good score, rather than just scraping over the line, is good preparation. When you work through the impact assessment, you will find that there are areas that are relatively easy to achieve, a little bit like an examination. Good preparation enables you to pick up the quote marks easy points and then focus on key strategic areas that will improve your business. For example, if you already have ISO 14001, you'll already be well on the way. Personally, I'd recommend targeting a higher score than you want to allow a bit of a buffer. Yeah. Also, having a good score is a really positive message for clients, suppliers, and employees. The actual score target you set will depend on your business. So personally, I didn't set out to achieve a score of 154.7, which is the highest score of any agency in the UK. My approach was rather to look at what we were already doing and then look at what additional B Corp actions would improve the business. If you want a good score, then this might be a useful approach to follow as well. Clearly, another approach would be to just try and scrape through. But your question was how to get a good score. Yeah. The other key to a good score is to try and pick up points in all the areas. This means you have to document some existing processes, spend a little more time collecting data, or introduce some new processes. I found that the new processes we introduced enhanced the business. An example would be ensuring that key values are throughout our supply chain by introducing supplier code of conducts. And I just want to rest on a moment here because this is a really, really important point to land. And that is that whilst I've talked about points, obtaining points improves the business. And that's where the real value is. It's not about the points, it's about the improvement to your business. If you do those things, I think it should be possible to get a really good score.
Good. Well, you did it. So hopefully
anyone can do it.
Are able to. So what have been the key benefits then that you've seen as a result of sort of achieving that B Corp status? albeit it's only
Yeah.
been sort of a little while since you achieved it?
Well, I'll steer away from theory on this and just go for the things that we've actually really noticed. So first of all, we're a marketing and advertising agency, so we're a people-based marketing business. It's made us more attractive to new joiners. Now, for us, that matters because in a challenging recruitment market, our B Corp status has been attractive to candidates because it's an external validation of the way a business is seeking to conduct itself. We've had feedback from HR that candidates are positively mentioning the B Corp in interviews. Secondly, the B Corp process itself has helped improve the business and formalized many of the good practices we already had in place. And I'm sure everyone else on this call already has in place, but it does bake them into the company culture. I'll state the obvious one now. Obtaining B Corp was just a fantastic message to deliver to employees and has really helped with employee engagement in the business. And we've noticed that. And then if we step back a bit now and think about wider stakeholders, both clients and suppliers have found the B Corp accreditation useful. But interestingly, they found it useful for their own ESG purposes. And the accreditation positions the business in a really positive way within their supply chain. Procurement actively like B Corp, which has helped with pitches and new business. And then something we hadn't really expected, but have really started to notice is that we've found all sorts of B Corp companies are reaching out to us. So B Corp companies are seeking to do business with other B Corp companies. For example, a recent headline in one of the marketing magazines was Patagonia on hunt for B Corp agency to handle EMA performance marketing. So this has real sort of commercial resonance as well. And I think finally, but just as important, is it provides a really useful framework for continuous business improvement. So the objective is not to obtain a score and then put your feet up and relax. One could say a little bit like an ISO, rather to seek ways to improve on the existing score. So the big thing about B Corp is it's less of an accreditation and more about a way of running a modern business.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And how has it sort of affected your relationships with your key stakeholder groups? I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but sort of widely.
Yeah, I mean, we work with a wide variety of clients. So we do a lot with not-for-profits, but we also do a significant amount in financial services. I've already touched upon how B Corp's been positively received by employees, and that the clients and suppliers like the B Corp is accredited since it helps their own ESG. I think also having an external validation by an independent organization does provide credibility and does help with accusations of greenwashing. I can definitely envisage that our trade with other B Corp companies or companies aligned with the values of B Corp will increase. Without a doubt, all the feedback we received is highly positive. For example, even our bank, Coutts, is B Corp, and they are delighted that we're also B Corp.
I bet they are. So, I mean, since becoming a B Corp, has the strategic directions or the decisions that the agency is making, have they changed at all, or were those themes already sort of embedded in the leadership structure and culture of the business?
The Good Agency's always been a purpose-driven strategy and creative agency. That's our niche. Therefore, B Corp hasn't changed the strategic direction of the business since we've always been purpose-driven. Therefore, our B Corp motivation was not to quickly jump on a bandwagon, rather to use it as a method to continue our purpose-driven journey. As you probably know, ESG on its own, has had a few credibility issues, as touched on earlier. However, it has introduced a formal structure of accountability and business improvement that I think will help the business remain true to its values. The accountability comes not just from the B Corp, but from the employees who hold management to account, since all the B Corp information is publicly available.
I understand that you are planning on delivering an impact report. Did you sort of feel that was sort of fundamentally necessary to sort of as an addition to the B Corp status?
Yeah, I mean, the impact report is part of the B Corp, and so we will be producing our first one later this year. My view on this is that it's one way of communicating to share stakeholders, and is therefore a good thing. Realistically, as with all businesses, it's only one of many ways that a business communicates with stakeholders. So it's a useful addition, but it's by no means the only way.
So would you recommend becoming a B Corp to others?
The big question. I mean, I can only speak based on my experience. B Corp improved and is continuing to improve our business. The benefits are at the moment making very sound commercial sense. It is really strengthening our relationship with key like-minded stakeholders and demonstrates a real commitment to ESG and purposeful business. It is a modern way of doing business. Thinking of all of that, therefore, yeah, I absolutely would recommend B Corp.
I thought you might say that, Graham. Thought you might say that. Well, thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive overview of going through that B Corp status, and I hope that was useful to everybody. So maybe coming back to Jeremy and Charlie then. So do you have any examples of where organisations have failed to incorporate ESG into their decision making and strategies?
Yeah, I think there's a really good example in the news at the moment, which is the Adidas and Kanye West saga that's ongoing. And as I'm sure everyone's aware, for those who aren't, Adidas have pulled the line of trainers that they co-designed with Kanye West because of his general erratic behavior. And I think specifically he'd made some anti-Semitic comments. And when they pulled that relationship, when they pulled that relationship with Kanye West, I think they had about $1.3 billion US dollars worth of stock on their balance sheet, which effectively became worthless overnight. And as a result of writing all of that stock off, I think I saw it reported that Adidas made their first annual loss in over 30 years.
Wow.
And now the board of directors and company are being sued for negligence. And I think with hindsight, it's always very easy to say and look at that counter narrative piece. But I do wonder when I read that if Adidas had a proper ESG system in place, decision-making system that is, and policies in place, if they may not necessarily have not entered into the agreement, but they might have been able to identify that risk earlier and put in place mitigating factors. So they may have been able to reduce the stock levels before it got pulled and before the stock became worthless. And so I think that is a very topical example. I think we've also had similar examples in our own client base. So we recently did a piece of work, a greenhouse gas calculation for a client who partway through the year switched energy supplier because of the rising energy prices. So as a cost saving effort, they shifted energy supplier. And what they hadn't considered was the kind of makeup of that energy supplier's kind of base energy load. So they moved from a relatively clean producer to a relatively dirty producer. And as a result, ended up emitting an extra 330 tons of carbon dioxide, which is the equivalent of driving around the world 60 times, driving a car around the world 60 times. So not an insignificant amount of emissions. And I think when you put that into the context of we were working with the UK element of a global group, and they were reporting to group. That group had put sustainability as one of its key objectives. And so you have a management team that is having to now report to group that they've failed to incorporate the environmental aspects of that decision into their processes, their decision making. And you know they're going to get a bit of a slap on the wrist for that, I'm sure. But it kind of highlights the importance of having data there to help make your decision making, to help make your decisions, and being able to evidence that is really important.
I just realised we're slightly over the time I had in my head. We're finishing at 11, but we're actually finishing at 10:45. So very quickly then, so if an organisation wants to improve their ESG creds, where do they start? Because I think that is where a lot of people probably struggle, isn't it? It feels like such an enormous task. Where do you start?
I'd recommend people start that risk assessment. So have a look at where you think the risks are, both to the business and from the business in respect of the various pillars. So again, depending on the nature of the industry or which sector you're in, that may well be heavy or light on the environmental. Pretty much everybody is going to have a fair amount to consider on the social. And then governance is slightly more, slightly less well defined, but actually a lot of that is about just thinking about what kind of levels of independence do you have in your review process? Have you got detailed various committees and all those sorts of things? But I would say you start off with that risk assessment. That just needs you to sit down with somebody who understands a little bit about ESG to help you go through categorizing. And then I think from there, you've got a pretty good chance to then get on with the potentially coming up with your own ESG or sustainability report. And I think that then gives you something that you can share with people, particularly all those relevant stakeholders, such as the people who might want to work for you.
And how high on the corporate agenda should spending time and effort on ESG credentials be, and how sort of quickly do you think that's going to move up the corporate agenda?
I think it's right now. There's a lot of discussion about people asking, what's my ESG strategy? I'd probably turn that on its head and say your ESG strategy is absolutely part of your general business strategy. So if you've got a really clear business strategy and you're thinking about the impact on your stakeholders, you're probably in a good place. If you're not, I'd recommend you probably want to start focusing on the ES and the G to perhaps help you on that general business strategy sooner rather than later.
I've been corrected. We have badged it till 11 o'clock. I should have stuck with my original thinking. Therefore, I will ask the two questions that we have outstanding from the delegate. So somebody's asked, how specifically should micro professional services firms best prepare to demonstrate their ESG credentials to potential clients? Don't know who wants to take that one.
I don't mind going. I think the most important thing, I think, when you're demonstrating your credentials is you need to have, first and foremost, is having a really clearly defined strategy, and that goes back to what Jeremy was talking about there around the risk assessment, understanding where your risks are and having a strategy to mitigate those is fundamentally the most important piece, and the rest can kind of fall out of that a little bit. You can then, once you've defined your strategy, your KPIs fall out of the strategy. It becomes a much more natural progression once you've done that initial piece of work. And that will then largely define what you are demonstrating to your clients. And I think that shows the best way, that's the best way of kind of evidencing that, I think.
And somebody else has asked, what's happened to CSR, the other three-letter acronym that nobody's mentioned today?
I don't mind taking that as well.
Yeah, go for it.
I don't think CSR has gone anywhere. I think it's been a bit of a rebranding, is kind of how I describe it. It's an evolution. I think we're very much kind of in that very education-y way. We're standing on the shoulders of CSR now with ESG. And I think if for organizations that have had or do have a strong CSR policy in place, that can form the basis of your ESG policies. Yeah. There's no reason to completely reinvent the wheel here. And I think that's something that we as a firm ourselves realized quite early on in the process, is that actually, when you sit down and you start looking at this properly, you realize you have lots of policies and lots of strategies in place that aren't necessarily branded as ESG, but are ESG policies and strategies. And it's more around bringing that all together to form a kind of all-encompassing, that kind of holistic strategy and approach to ESG.
You had another question come in. How do you build a case for ESG investment when it could impact profitability, which is usually the focal point of investors, particularly when you're PE backed?
I'm happy to say that one. I think there's starting to be a lot of evidence as well. So a lot of PE firms will be impact investors, and actually the market of people who will supply you with finance is becoming one for whom ESG is increasingly important. So I think it's one of those things where when you can demonstrate your ESG credentials are strong, it makes you a more attractive proposition, probably irrespective of a short-term impact on profitability, if the longer-term value of the business is going to be increased as a result of you having great ESG. And if we go back to the fact that ESG is a great business strategy generally, I think there's a kind of misconception that PE doesn't like great ESG businesses. I think it's increasingly becoming PE really likes great ESG businesses. So the further you go down that route, the more success you're likely to have with the likes of PE.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly my experience, having sort of spoken to a number of PE investors in the media and marketing services sector. It's definitely working the way up their agenda. Well, I think we'll call it a wrap. Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Don't forget, it has been recorded, so please do share it with anyone who missed today, and please do fill out the feedback form. And our next webinar will be on corporate philanthropy, and that is on Thursday, the 22nd of June at 10 a.m. So hopefully see some of you there. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.